now I'm going to hit this same thing that I'd done before. I'm just going to start kind of just working this in here a little bit. Now this brush that I'm using will leave a little bit more brush marks than that other one, but that's fine because it might give me a little bit of an effect here that's interesting on the cheek. So I'm just working that edge. You got to flip it over. You got to kind of turn it around the corner, you know, you don't want that start and stop problem. Remember what's the right side and the left side. Now, I want to do some dabbing in the middle of this orange color, but I've got dark color on one side of the brush and I've got light color on the other, so I got to turn the brush completely sideways to just get the orange. You know, I don't want to be dragging the dark color into the light color. If I don't want that to happen, I have to, you know, rotate the brush and make sure that I'm only getting the orange in there. I'm going to start getting a little bit closer there. So this one again, it's the same thing. I'm just kind of getting in here. You know, very similar to what we were doing on the back, just a smaller version of that. So I'm kind of regretting using this small brush at the moment. I'll explain that in a second. But right now I'm still just kind of spreading this out so that it can continue to dry. That orange color is still kind of juicy and it's not quite where I would like it to be. But it's getting close. So I'm just going to let it sit just for a second. I almost want that to get as dry as it's going to get here for me, if I could. Clean it up a little bit. Now, the other thing that I'm going to do is that I don't want to have to come back when I want to paint this bill and have like where I stopped halfway through and I've got like black and gray or something, because later when I come to put the cover coat of gray on it, I'm going to be going over that transition and it's never going to look quite right. So, you know, just for today, for this moment in time, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pick up one of these grays that we've been using and I'm going to use that to just kind of make the whole bill gray here, you know, solely for coverage purposes later. There's really no reason for me to paint this bill right now, but, you know, why not? To make it easier for later, I'll get rid of that sharp line. The other thing it'll do is I'll make sure that I smooth this bill out real nice instead of having partially stippled paint on it or what have you. That later that'll kind of show through my finish coat. I'll make sure the edges are cleaned up nice where I cut that mandible in, but I don't have to paint the bottom of it. Just want to make sure there isn't anything lumpy going on. So I know that's a good idea to do that. And so now, what I really want is a medium one of these, but I don't happen to have one, so I'm going to use this. So hopefully this is set up now enough where I can just go in here and with the bigger brush, other than I just lost a big hair in there. With the bigger brush I can just go in and just give it the final. And I've had some of these mops for 5 or 6 years, so eventually they start to fall apart a little bit, but for the most part they're fine. Except for this one keeps dropping hairs, it's just driving me crazy right now. And once that paint gets set up, it's almost hard to transfer it around. So instead of having a situation where you're trying to blend and it's like everything's kind of melding together, if you wait just a little while, you come to blend, it takes a lot. So instead of hitting it 3 times and it's all mixed together, if it's starting to set up, you got to hit it 10 times to just get it to move. Well, now I can control, because now I can decide whether I want to go 10 times or 15 times. If you do 1, 2, and the third time's too much, it's like I need more chances than that to, get it to work out. So sometimes when it sets up, it just makes it easier to kind of control what you're doing. But and there's other instances where you'll learn where you want to have the paint be kind of liquid if you can. Just depends on the situation or what you're doing. So now I'm done, so to speak. I just want to be conscious of those final brush marks and kind of flow lines, even though you're hardly going to see it. But, I see it. So that's it. It sure seems like a lot to get a simple decoy done.
So Jeffrey, you're going to let it sit for the night. What will you come back and do in the morning? Or
Well,
tomorrow afternoon or the next day?
Yeah, what I don't want to make people sit here, so I am going to finish this up though. I'm going to paint the bottom while I'm sitting here, and then maybe I can go through some of those other things too. So whoever wants to stick around, fine. If you don't worry about it. You won't hurt my feelings. Basically, everything else that's left here, if you look at that decoy that's finished, and again, I try to go through a process where I'm not kind of stepping on myself. I'll come in and I'll put the trim in on the backs of these secondaries here. I'll get the black in on the speculum. I try to work in a sequence on that stuff going this way. And it's similar paint colors, but I'll tint the gray here or there a little bit, and I'll just put that little bit of detail in, usually working from this side to this side and this way back. But that's all happening at the same time. And then there's really nothing for me to paint up here on the body. That's all done. So then I can turn the decoy around, and if you come up and look at that bill was all painted at one time in one sitting. So there's black underneath, there's the gray color, that white. You can see where I used one of the techniques where I would put that, where's my little, well, I guess they're all dirty, that's why I can't find it. But I would use a little mop brush like this, and I would run over that, so I would blend that line. When I put that white paint on there though, that paint would have been, you know, with a brush that was 1/8 of an inch wide or whatever, so I could put that strip of paint on next to that gray. I would do that blending, then I put my finger on the end of the bill and I would take a brush and I would go right around that bill, and again I take that black and I clean the white right off. And then also, like with these nostrils up here, those things always drive me crazy because you can never get them in the right spot. You work on it, you look at the decoy from the front and you're like, how in the hell does that happen every time? I get some black paint on there and I get it close, but then because I'm doing it all wet, what I can do is I can come up next to that and I can kind of push it over a little bit with the brush and I can adjust it. I mean, it's got to be close enough, but I'll kind of go back and forth a little bit, you know, just painting around those two things to kind of get them where I want them. Then I move forward, paint the white, then I paint the black bill, and then I go back on, you know, underneath and paint the bottom of the decoy. But I start here at the front, so there's a little bit of a blended line between that black and that gray. Again, just one of those little things where if you look at it, there's a little point that comes down the bill and you can see that that was blended wet. You know, that's purposely there for somebody to say, how'd you do that? Well, you know, you got that's top secret. That's why I'm not doing that today. But it's easy, you know. You're just taking that brush up against the other thing, pulling it down, blending those together. You could see where I would come up that, and then I turn down the middle of the bill, and when I pull the brush down, it just creates that little point. I do a left-handed or right-handed, and it all kind of comes together that way. So
you're saying that that paint from today will still be wet enough to apply tomorrow?
no, what'll happen is that this, because this color is the color that it is, which is full raw umber, this will be dry tomorrow morning. This gray on this bill. I will come and I'll put a whole coat right over the top of it with this new stuff. But when I'm doing it, the black, the new gray, the white, and the black on the end of the bill will all be wet. So I'm using the ability to paint the whole thing at one time to my advantage, not like, you know, sometimes, Brandon, where you're saying where you're trying to put stuff over stuff and things. If you do it in sequence, it works to your advantage. It's easier for me to get these nostrils to look good when it's wet and I can adjust it. Then later, if I'm trying to freehand them on there, then I'm back to, oh shit. And then wanting to, now I want to do like I'm an acrylic painter. I have the nostril not right where I want it. Now I want to go find some of that gray that's the exact same color so I can overpaint and cover up, and that doesn't exist. One, I don't know where the hell that gray color went, probably. And two, I'd have to wait some period of time before I could come back and overpaint. And moving the colors next to each other and then letting it sit is so much better than trying to overpaint, because if I would try to overpaint a mistake, the new paint, even if it's 2 days later, will have a tendency to reactivate the oil paint underneath it. So if you try to use that cover-up acrylic painting technique with the oil paint, then it starts to reactivate, and now you're like, oh, I'm not, you know, you'd have to wait a week to be able to use a cover. Well, every time you make a mistake, you can't wait a week to paint over the top of it. So, again, it was a long sitting to get through this. If you can plan, somebody asked a question of what if you don't have that much time? Well, paint it to a point, decide where you're going to have a hard line, and finish it some other time. But the more of it that you can do at one time, you can fix those mistakes along the way. It takes more time, but ultimately it probably saves you energy, you know, over the whole course of the thing. I mean, I can tell you, yeah, it takes me 3 hours to paint this from tip to tail, but when I painted with acrylics, it took me so long to paint a bird because I kept going back and fixing and over this and next to that and all of that kind of stuff. But it's because it's a totally different style too. I mean, there's certain things where you have to layer and you have to do all of that. That's not for me. I'd rather do this, feel like I'm efficiently creating a hunting decoy with minimal steps, because that's part of the challenge. And if I wanted to do something more decorative, well, obviously I'd have to use a whole bunch of different types of techniques, but that's you know, why I do this. Because to me, I love this style, I love this shape of decoy. There's just lots of historical, traditional things about it that really appeal to me. So this year I promise that I'm going to take time this summer to work on my own rig, but we'll see how that goes. I've said that before.